and public space, renewable energy systems, and we've expanded to other regenerative systems as well. We'll talk about that. The idea of living buildings and cities, which take their inspiration from the kind of old growth forest that gets all of its energy from the sun, and then that energy is recycled and recycled and recycled, and there's no externalization of waste streams. Buildings and cities should aspire to that level of circularity in their systems design, and putting that all together. If you go back to the beginning of electrification, all of our power plants were already located right in the hearts of our cities. They were coal-fired and gas-fired, so they weren't awesome to live next to, but they were designed beautifully by architects of the time. This is a beautiful example of a power station in Lisbon that's been turned into a renewable energy museum. Other power plants have been turned into museums, like the Tate Modern in London as another well-known example, because they're beautiful. We don't want to tear these buildings down. But as we were able to raise the voltage of electricity high enough to convey it over long distances efficiently, the power plants left the city because they're polluting. And they became more pure utility, something to drive quickly by. No one really understands where their electricity comes from now beyond the switch on the wall, because of that cultural disconnection between the power infrastructures and the places that we live and work. And that utilitarian aesthetic and design process has continued into the space of renewable energy landscape design. As you can see here, two slightly more egregious examples of just designing renewable energy systems without concern for art or aesthetics. Of course, everybody has their own opinion. We think three-blade horizontal axis wind turbines in a landscape are quite profoundly beautiful as kinetic works of art in a way. But the aesthetics of renewable energy have become an issue that has led to a not in my backyard pushback against the proliferation of these infrastructures. And if we're going to meet the targets that the IPCC has set for the world to maintain 1.5 degrees maximum warming, then we will need to use quite a lot of land. And it's going to transform our built environments in ways like nothing since the advent of the automobile. So we need to think proactively about what these infrastructures look like, and when it's appropriate to think about the co-benefits of designing these in collaboration with communities and perhaps with artists and architects and designers.
And at the very least, conversations around our renewable energy infrastructure need to be inclusive and a conversation around equity. So, everyone needs to have a seat at the table as we move forward in this transition. But like Robert was saying, there we were overlooking Ski Dubai, and really the bullet point, the question was, what if we were to reimagine our renewable energy landscapes as large-scale works of art? We had this vision that around the United Arab Emirates, there would be these incredible installations like you're looking at here that would be tourist destinations and places that we could really take our families on a picnic, but also understand that it was a renewable energy power plant. So we started by using the competition model. We did have the thought of, well, we're an artist and architect couple, let's design our own land art generators. And we did as concepts to help explain the idea. Since this didn't exist, how do we let people know what it is we're talking about? But we thought the competition model was really spectacular because it could reach so many people around the world. And then it's not just the two of us having a conversation, but it becomes quickly a global conversation. This is a snapshot of the competitions we've held around the world. We started in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, went to New York City, Copenhagen, Santa Monica, Melbourne, back to Abu Dhabi. Last year, we were at Fly Ranch, Nevada. That was a partnership with Burning Man. Next year, we're in Mannheim, in Germany. Now, what you don't necessarily understand from this slide is that each design site is a different site typology. So ranging from landfills to brownfield sites to coastal sites and other typologies. It's important to us that our design teams always have some kind of a new challenge, but at the same time, we're building a portfolio so that folks can come in and look at that portfolio. Every city has a landfill, and there's different needs for development on those landfills, as a, for example. Coming up to Logi 2022 Mannheim, this is going to open March of next year, $30,000 cash prize, so stay tuned on that. And we want to share this with you because this is a bit of a snapshot. It's not just a competition. The results include, yes, amazing concepts that you're about to see, juicy images, but also a wide range of public programming, workshops, lectures, publications. It's really broad programming that we enter a community with.
So we're going to take you through a quick survey of just a few of the ideas that have come into the design competitions over the last 10 years or so. We're going to do that by technology type. So as you can see here, you have polycrystalline on the left and monocrystalline silicon photovoltaic modules. These are similar to what you would put on your rooftop. You give these to an artist working with an engineer and you get energy duck. So this is, everybody loves a duck, so why not make one that powers your entire neighborhood? And the team is using the photovoltaic module as the exterior cladding for this artwork that celebrates the eider duck, native to the region around Denmark that the Copenhagen competition was held for. And it's at risk because of climate change. So it's a way to educate the public. It's also a battery that raises and lowers itself in the water. So it uses gravity of the duck itself as a gravity energy storage mechanism. And won't go too deep into that. Here you have bifacial solar panels used to create these beautiful spheres. They're actually eggs, falcon eggs, scaled way up to celebrate the importance of the falcon in the culture of the UAE. And they contain these beautiful ecosystems inside of the spheres. Now, you don't need to limit your creativity to the blue tinted photovoltaics that we're all familiar with. You can get golden colored solar panels like you see on the right there. Solar panels of any color. You can also, excuse me, you can also laminate the face glass of any solar module to make it a solid color or even a visual graphic image, as we'll show in a little bit. Here you have that golden tinted photovoltaic module used in a custom shape to create a new photovoltaic sun for the city of Abu Dhabi. This is the very first entry that came into the competition. So whenever you hold a design competition, everybody submits in the last 24 hours. So you have to be aware of that. But this one,
we didn't know that in the beginning when we started this process, and really did think that the project was a failure. And then I think we closed May 15 in 2010. And we were in the United Arab Emirates, so our day ended before everyone else in the world. And I thought, okay, that's it, it's a failure. But we woke up the next morning and had around 150 submissions waiting, and they were amazing.
It wasn't a complete failure because Antonio Maca totally got the idea and he submitted a month early. So we knew we had this one and it was really quite beautiful. We've actually worked with him since to confirm how to build this and gone through schematics. So we're ready to construct this artwork and hopefully we'll be able to very soon. That goes for a lot of the artworks that you're seeing here. We remain in progress towards development. As you can see here, the annual capacity as we continue to go through, this generates about 1,000 megawatt hours a year, which if you use an average of 10 megawatt hours per single family home, it would power about 100 homes. This is the winner light up for the Logi 2018 Melbourne Design Competition. And it uses that lamination technology over the face glass of monocrystalline panels. So it's actually very productive. And this creates this beautiful yellow stream of energy that flows off of a hotel and then down over Jacob Boulevard, which is a major thoroughfare in the city of Port Phillip. That today it separates St. Kilda Triangle, this green space that you see on the left, which is currently a parking lot. So this is the imagining of its future. It connects St. Kilda Triangle to the foreshore, to the waterfront. Safely creates this beautiful place for people where you can walk across and you can learn about the technologies, connects people to where their energy is being generated. The pipe is interesting. It's clad in solar modules, and that electricity from those solar panels is used directly to desalinate 4.5 billion liters of drinking water every year. In the interior of the artwork is a large pool that's full of high saline water that is the byproduct of the desalination process. And as some of you may know, that's an issue with desalination, because if you just dump that brine into the sea, it's very damaging to the marine environment. So by using this holding tank, they can mix it slowly with the water and reduce the ratio of salinity in the water that's released. It also provides a public amenity where you can go and you can lay in that water and float as if you're in the Dead Sea, and it may be good for your skin. You can think about other types of photovoltaic technology as well. And here we have an example of organic photovoltaic on the left and dye-sensitized solar cells. These are all flexible. They're all the colors of the rainbow. They're semi-translucent. It provides a really wonderful medium for creative expression. As you can see here, all of these pink ribbons are the actual solar panels. So this, as Elizabeth said earlier, is a power plant where you can definitely take your family for a picnic. And it would generate at least as much energy as to power the number of homes of the people who would come to visit this on any given day. Concentrated solar power, CSP technology, was one of the things that really inspired us in 2008 when we conceived of the project at Ski Dubai. We were seeing these solar power towers going up in deserts around the world. Ivanpah in California. There's a bunch of them in Spain at the time, and these are concentrating the thermal energy of the sun onto a set of mirrors and concentrating that to a collector where a heat transfer fluid flows through salt that's been turned into molten salt. It flashes to steam, powers a turbine. All of our electricity, or most of our electricity today, comes from generators that are powered by heat. And whether that heat comes from coal, nuclear reaction, or whatever, at the end of the day, it's a generator that's being run by a turbine. And so you can get that electricity from the power of the sun directly. We saw these towers going up, and it was almost like unintentional works of land art. You got these 10,000 mirrors in the desert. It's really quite incredible. So that got us thinking about, what if we were more intentional with the design of our energy landscapes, and what could we accomplish with that? The winner of the 2014 competition for Copenhagen used that same exact technology that you saw on the previous slide and to create the solar hourglass. It's an hourglass to remind us all that there's still time to avert the worst effects of climate change if we can act together. It's a positive, inspiring message about a future where we've solved the climate crisis. And it is a way to sort of offset the gloom and doom communications of climate science, which are important, but if that's all we focus on is heat level rise and sea level rise, then it kind of shuts us down to political action. We're kind of like deers in headlights and we don't know what to do. Apocalypse porn. We're trying to show instead a vision of a future that we can all desire to run towards rather than just run away from something scary. And this definitely does that. It allows people to come right up to a protective, insulating cylinder of glass that you can touch and feel that heat energy from that beam of light created by the heliostat mirrors in the top bulb of the hourglass, beaming down to the lower bulb of the hourglass where you have that concentrator and the balance of systems in the turbine, generates electricity for 1,000 homes. The Oasis is another entry from the same team that produced the pipe from 2016. In 2019, they came back to the site for Abu Dhabi at Masdar City, and they created this beautiful landscape that makes it rain inside just based on the power of the sun. And how they do that is that they use photovoltaic thermal technology. So it's generating electricity, but it's also generating hot water. They take that hot water and they put it through an absorption chiller that creates chilled water that they pipe through the superstructure. And as you know, if you're in a humid environment, which Abu Dhabi is, and you have chilled pipes, there's condensate that forms on those chilled pipes. And so it creates a natural rainfall inside of this beautiful artwork. Wind technology can be used as a media for artwork. These are ducted wind turbines. They take advantage of the Venturi effect that accelerates wind as it hits the rotor in a wind turbine. And that same technology can be incorporated into art, like Fresh Hills, an entry to Loggy 2012, New York City. It's at Fresh Kills landfill, which is now Fresh Kills Park. And so these landfill mounds, this artwork is centered at the top of one of those. It uses these beautiful landforms to accelerate the wind as it rushes up the hill and concentrates it towards the turbines, creating this beautiful, calm space even on the windiest of days. Other interesting technologies out there can be incorporated into artwork. These are a little bit more bleeding edge, but a lot of teams are interested in using kinetic energy harvesting technologies like piezoelectric stacked actuators and linear alternators. Those two technologies come together for wind stock. It's a wind farm without any blades because it uses carbon fiber tubes with piezoelectric actuators that create electricity from the bending and the pressure force applied to those discs. So as these blades wave in the wind, just like a field of grass blades, but scaled up, the energy is generated from that back and forth movement. And then below the ground, there are linear alternators that capture the movement of the lower part of the stock. Catching the Wave from Loggy 2016 Santa Monica uses wave energy converters as the media for artwork, which may be the first time in the world that's been done. It reflects the way that the Santa Monica Pier used to be used before World War II as a yacht harbor, and it creates these beautiful places you can kayak out to. We've been reflecting it. This is very COVID safe, but this was done in 2016, so a little prescient. I'm going to show you a couple of examples from the 2020 Fly Ranch competition that we closed earlier, late last year, and the winners were announced earlier this year.
It was a wee bit of a different brief. Of course, energy was included in the design brief, but Burning Man acquired nearly 4,000 acres that's not far from Black Rock City and completely off-grid. And they're interested in developing year-round programming, not necessarily the big event, the Burning Man event, but year-round programming, and will need some infrastructure. So the design brief tackled shelter, energy, water, agriculture, and composting waste management. So you're about to see just a couple outcomes from that design brief.
This is the winner that really is focusing on habitat creation and centering the species who have lived in this landscape before Burning Man acquired it. It's an educational venue that uses parametric architectural design technologies combined with local materials to create these beautiful spaces that are designed to create habitats and also to erode naturally over time into the landscape. Aquaplantera is a team that came back again that has participated in past competitions, and they create drinking water using micropores and porcelain vessels. And these porcelain vessels are designed in collaboration with community using roping ceramic technologies or techniques, and they create these beautiful little microhabitats for local species. Coop is really fun. It's an egg-shaped hen house with a little solar hat to keep the chickens cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And these little Coop X mobile units get moved around the site to help fertilize the soil over time. And with that, we want to just sort of wrap up and remind everybody that how important it is to tackle our energy transition. And as we're building back better and building back solar, we need to work with communities directly so that not every community solar installation ends up looking like this, where it's basically taking land away from the city, putting it behind a barbed wire fence, and then there's nothing wrong with this from the perspective of greening our energy grid. But if every solar installation looks like this one, we're going to do a larger disservice to the overall movement. Instead, we can lift these panels off the ground, create micro parks for neighborhoods, design them in collaboration with communities. We can laminate the face of these solar modules when they're in very public spaces so that they can become part of mural art programs for cities. We're doing that. These are two images from San Antonio, where we've installed projects that we've collaborated with community, co-designed with community, co-designed with young people. Here you have a 5th grade class at JT Brackenridge Elementary. They're very proud. They are in that photo, and they came up with the concept to include a photo of the school class from 1906 with their class to show the continuity of the neighborhood over time. So this tells a beautiful story that will live on and give energy to the school for 30 years at least, so they can show their kids this project right around the time that it's time to do a new one. And so this is a new model that we hope will allow solar to proliferate in places where it otherwise couldn't go with a utilitarian design approach, and just inspire everybody about how awesome the energy transition will be, and that meeting our climate goals is not about sacrifice and asceticism, but it's about creating a really wonderful place that can enhance human thriving. We love working with young people on longer scale projects where they can build their own energy sculptures for their neighborhoods. This is a project we did in Pittsburgh. As you can see, it's designed inspired by the shape of a violet flower, the bilateral symmetry, and a Tory gate. This is a reclamation of an old marquee that was just sitting there rusting in an old dollar store that never opened up, and the community took it back, made it a community center, took that old marquee as an armature to create a solar sculpture that powers the community center. These are the kind of projects that can get everybody really inspired about the future.
We create, like I mentioned earlier, educational programming and publications as outcomes from all of our design challenges, sometimes dual language, and the educational materials are always free downloads from our website. And then we also hand out free copies, usually doing a limited run of 500 to 1,000. The Field Guide to Renewable Energy Technology is a resource that is pretty relevant for all of our design teams, but anyone on this call might be interested in downloading. We designed it for the first time in 2012 and just redesigned it. And, these things need updating. So just last year we updated it. So version 2 is available now. We just created a board game for our Logi 2020, hot off the press. So we're really excited to be just starting the process of handing out and delivering 500 of these board games. It's a cooperative resource management game. So it's all about collaborating and interdisciplinary collaboration. So you choose your role and work together to solve some issues out at the site, which in this case is Fly Ranch. And we're going to end there because we would really like to have time for a conversation. And we know we were talking fast and going through it, but we think the value of chat time is important. So let's jump in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that really overpowering presentation. There's so much in there. Questions are coming in, many. Let's start with Fiz. You had 2 questions, one about efficiency and one about a design manual. Do you want to ask those questions?
Sure. So, hello, thank you for the brilliant presentation. After watching this presentation, I feel I'm so many years behind, maybe a different century or something, but I'll catch up. Anyway, so I had this simple question. So, we're just used to looking at all these conventional solar panels and with the different shapes that you've showed. I just want to ask what is basically like a couple of questions, like what's their efficiency and, people who are actually competing in competition competitions, how do they decide which shape, which angle, which size is optimal for the design? And lastly, do you go for a life cycle cost analysis? Because, maybe somebody would want to use these in a residential setting, but, may not meet their worth, like it might not be worth their investment. So just these three questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Fiz. Those are all great and really layered questions with layered answers. I'm going to start with what do we provide the design teams, because that's actually the most straightforward in many ways. We put together a lot of material. So it takes us about 1.5 to 2 years to organize the design competition before we even launch. And a lot of that time is putting together robust supplemental material so that teams don't have to fly to the site. They, through the materials we put together, they can really understand the design site and the regional framework. And that could be framing in terms of what our sustainability goals to different types of information so that they know exactly what it is they're designing for. And then we put together a very tight design brief. So we asked for these projects to be site specific. So the form really comes out of that design site. And often there's a story that design teams like to tell based on the locality, the region, and in some cases the nation, if it's a small place like Denmark.
Yeah, and I think, your questions, Viz, are awesome. I think if we were to plant someone in the audience to ask the questions, we would have had them ask those, because it really gets to the heart of what the fusion between these worlds of energy development and community development are bringing forward. The standard model for solar development is, as you rightly mentioned, looking at what is the power purchase agreement cost of this energy going to be, and we're trying to get as low as possible, and obviously in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, trying to compete against the incumbent forms of energy, coal, natural gas. That fight is being won very quickly by solar and wind now, with power purchase agreements less than 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And so there's starting to open up some space for creativity and interesting opportunities for projects that have a more holistic look at the benefits to society beyond just reliable energy. We come at this from an art and architecture background, and worlds in which the bottom line of return on investment is not the only criteria through which to view projects in built environment.
And here's a for example. So, and often we have this slide, and I actually took it out at the last minute. Now I wish I hadn't. But there's a project that was up in New York City for 4 months called
Public art.
Public art.
Public art perspective.
New York City Waterfalls by Oliver Eliasson, 4-month project. It was a $15.5 million project, privately funded, but $15.5 million for 4 months. So very temporary. This is not one of our projects. It's a great project though. But what's great is that the New York City Department of Economic, what am I trying to say here? Development, thank you. They did a great study that shows that this project brought in $53 million in incremental spending during those 4 months. So the return on investment in public art has a slightly different lens than renewable energy, but now imagine an artwork that's up permanently that also brings in that kind of traffic for tourism, that $53 million in 4 months, but is up permanently and also providing kilowatt hours, educational programming, the STEAM programming on site, et cetera. So we like that balance.
Just to say that we need to start thinking in terms of other metrics and KPIs rather than just the energy that's generated, and projects that engage with communities. And not every project meets that criteria. So if you're doing a utilitarian installation of a 100 megawatt solar farm way out in the desert, maybe you should think about how it interfaces with the highway that runs by it, how it's visible from a visual resource perspective. But for the most part, that's just going to be nuts and bolts. You're going to put the solar there and make as cheap kilowatt hours you possibly can. But when you're bringing this infrastructure into the city, and more research shows the value of distributed energy resources to the overall mix, that the equation becomes different. We need to make sure that when we built our highways in the middle of the 20th century, sometimes in some situations there wasn't enough consideration given to how those impacted neighborhoods and communities, and we lament those failed opportunities now. Cities were destroyed because the thought wasn't given over, and we need to think more intentionally about how these new energy landscapes are going to impact neighborhoods and how they can provide co-benefits. Because what's the value of a shade structure that allows people to use a space that reduces the heat island effect, that photovoltaics over water reservoirs for the city that reduce evaporation and allow for more efficient use of water resources, agrivoltaic installations over community farms. So you're sharing land uses between the solar energy and food production or other uses. And so then the equation for investment becomes very different.
So,
Thank you so much.
great answers. Oh, did you want to say more?
No, I just want to say thank you. Since you asked, I'll make use of the opportunity. One more thing. So I've been part of the solar decathlon competitions, and if you propose such an ambitious item for a project, their main question is, do you have any installation issues or do you need specialized labor for this? So same question to you. What would be the challenges in training people if these things are to be installed outside the zone they're already proposed? Thank you.
Well, it depends on the complexity of the project. Some of them are just using conventional modules right off the shelf. Some of them would require customization of those modules. And there are a number of companies around the world who are doing that work. So we kind of act as a bridge between the creatives and the technology providers who are offering those services. And you can make a solar panel look like pretty much anything you'd like and in any shape you'd like these days. It's just a matter of the additional expense. But if you're coming at it again from art perspective first, and it just happens to be an artwork that pays back its carbon footprint and its construction cost over time, that's kind of unique for the art world. And so this is a real opportunity to merge those together for the benefit of the planet.
Fantastic answers. Lots of questions here. Christina and Mersa had a very similar question, actually, and Adele. So why don't we, can we go in that order? Christina, Mersa, and Adele, do you want to ask your questions?
Sure. So I think actually they had two questions. So the first one would have been, do you see like a common sense of response? Doesn't matter in what location the competition is. Like, do the people who enter the competition actually have like a common idea of what's the solutions? And then my second one was, I don't know if you mentioned that what the background of the competitors is, but is it mostly architects or design teams too, or come they from different backgrounds?
Yeah, I'll speak about the interdisciplinary approach of the teams. When we started the project, because I have an art background, I thought, oh, this is great. Let's have artists at the helm of our energy transition. But alas, artists are not really tapped into the competition model. So what we find is that it's predominantly architects, landscape architects, engineers, and environmental scientists working together. Very heavy on the landscape architect, and most often they have engineers on their teams. So that's what we see most of. But we have had solo artists, solo architects. We've had poets on teams. I don't know if you noticed the team that won Longy 2018 Melbourne, the project Light Up that went over Jacob Boulevard, the yellow like ribbon looking project. That was an amazing interdisciplinary team of, gosh, maybe 30 people that included an engineering firm, architecture, landscape architecture, but they also included a group of students at RMIT. And I mean, it was just an incredible team. So, there's a wide scope, rarely artists though.
Yeah, we're definitely proponents of the idea that it's through interactivity between disciplines that true innovations get sparked. In terms of the responses to sites, we ask that they be very informed by the local context and the site specificity. And so the results do reflect that. However, I think maybe within your question is sort of a question about how adaptable they could be for other sites, or if there's similarities between years. We definitely see that, and these projects could be adapted to new sites, absolutely. They're only concept designs, so they do require a lot more detailed design. And so if they're going to be for a new context, there's not much loss there. You could move to the new site and adapt it very easily. And we definitely see themes across years when the projects come in regarding, there's a lot of, when we were at Fresh Kills Park, there were a lot of ideas for kites and incorporating play into the energy landscape. So that's definitely true.
And I don't know if Robert just mentioned this, but a lot of teams come back. We have at least a dozen that come back every year. And it's like family at this point. It's quite nice.
And Antonio Maca, who did the solar ecosystem, the Golden Sphere, he enters almost every year so he's been there from the beginning. And we just, every time he enters, it just blows our mind that he keeps coming up with these amazing new ideas.
Amazing. Mirza?
I think most of my questions are asked by Christine, but I have so many questions. First of all, this is just so cool. Maybe this is the first time I have seen like sustainability and this renewable energy in this concept and this framework. But my question is more for committee or jury side. Do you also like deciding it based on being artists and like how artistic it is? Or do you actually have engineers that would go and check back on whatever content your people who are attending that competition are actually providing you? Because I don't know, it seems like as you get a good idea, you go and implement it, but there needs to be a time, like on engineering side, how good and well developed is that design?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was almost going to finish my last answer with the answer to this question. So our selection process goes like this. We put together multiple selection teams. One is a shortlisting group and the other is the official jury group. Both are interdisciplinary. So we want engineers, landscape architects, artists, local stakeholders such as politicians who understand the site, local indigenous groups who need to have a voice at the table, community groups, et cetera. So it's very interdisciplinary. The first phase, a shortlisting event, and we're never involved in the jury process. So it's anonymous, which is very critical for a fair outcome. We know as the designs are coming in, we know who they've come in from. So we stay out of that process and we facilitate a very fair process throughout and make sure that everything maintains anonymity. But the shortlisting event is an amazing day-long event, typically different last year because of COVID, of course, but typically a day-long in-person event only with local stakeholders that's truly interdisciplinary and people who are invested in that design site. Invested meaning maybe they literally are financially invested or emotionally invested. It's their land. It's, maybe it's a traditional land of a specific indigenous group. And so they need to be at the table understanding these particular designs for the site. You get the idea. So it's a day-long breakout groups, interdisciplinary, bring down however many submissions, 200 to the top 25. Now that top 25 then goes to an official jury, which is an online process for a month. And yes, we need to know that engineers are weighing in as heavily as creatives. So actually we see engineers as creatives. So I should say as, say, an artist or an architect, because we need to know that whatever submissions win really have gone through all of those filters.
And for 2020, actually, it was the most robust selection process we've ever had. There were 200 technical advisors that poured through all of the concepts at the very beginning.
Before any other selection process. And this wasn't even the selection process. We got 2,000 comments from 200 technical advisors.
And so all of those comments were available to the shortlisting and the final jury process so that they would inform it along the way.
Fantastic. Adele, I think you had an interesting question.
Sure. I want to say thank you both for your presentation. I agree with Mirza when I say I'm very excited. I've never seen energy in this context before either. But my question was related to what you mentioned earlier and throughout your presentation. You mentioned there were a lot of co-benefits with these designs that and by implementing renewable technologies into communities and into neighborhoods where they could be used to go to picnics and other stuff. But I was curious if you foresee these projects being used for community revitalization and how realistic that would be to implement at the local level.
I'm going to talk about Blowback Solar.
Yeah, thanks, Adele. That tees up a project that we've been brewing up. We're calling it Build Back Solar, and the idea is to create benchmarks for cities to aspire to solar uptake within the boundaries of the municipality. We have initially the first target would be to install one solar module per resident of a city. So if you have a city of 300,000 people, there would be 300,000 solar modules inside the city limits. Most cities aren't really yet close to that kind of uptake. So what we've put together is a very detailed process that it learns from the best practices of community development, creative placemaking, since
inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
Key components.
Since the Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs was published, learning from what I referred to before as some of the unfortunate outcomes of the redevelopment of the middle century, thinking about how we could build cities, learning from the work that had been done in terms of sociology, psychology of habitation, understanding how healthy communities can be co-designed with the people who are there and living in them. A whole specialty within urban design and planning has evolved over the past decades. And there's so much to be gained from that knowledge and the people who work within that space, who embark upon developments in the urban realm, first through a very close engagement with communities, co-design processes. We want to bring that model to the development of energy landscapes, especially within more populated areas, so that these two models can come together to the benefit of thriving cities that can reduce the carbon footprint, reduce reliance on externalized sources of energy, therefore becoming more resilient and adaptable, and then also expanding the investment model so that there's a lot more equity in the investment. So the secret is out in terms of Wall Street investors that solar installations are a rather low risk investment that returns about 7% on an annualized rate. That opportunity needs to be made available to everybody, and communities who invest in their own solar installations. We want to see that this reinvestment, this building back better for communities, ends up also providing opportunities to narrow the great wealth gap that has emerged over the last 50 years or so as well, or has become even more disparate. How can we use the investment in solar infrastructure, distributed renewable energy, community energy infrastructure to provide wealth building opportunities for communities who have historically been disenfranchised from that opportunity. And the way to do that is to create energy cooperatives and neighborhoods, to engage people in the design and implementation of their own energy landscapes, creating pocket parks for solar, community solar, doing that in collaboration with other regenerative projects like urban farming. And it's through that process that we could bring a higher percentage of our energy infrastructure into population centers, leave our natural landscapes natural, whether that's for recreational use, whether that's for land conservation. We don't want the answers to the climate challenge to become a response that ends up being a neo-colonial relationship to land use again, just in taking large swaths of desert where we think nothing lives, but in fact are very rich ecosystems, and papering them over with solar, when in fact we could do so much in our urban environment to create living cities, and that's the aspiration.
That was a long answer.
Sorry about that.
It's a hot topic for us right now, so we appreciate the question.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, wonderful answer. Thank you for going into some detail. Really important. Let's see, Gracie, you had a question on deciding the site.
Just curious how you, like, if different sites reach out to you to maybe have their site be the competition site, or maybe you just find different sites. So I was just curious about how that process works.
Yeah, well, in the beginning, because we were trying to figure it out ourselves, what we were doing in 2008 through 2012, really, we went out and found the design sites. But since that time, we've done all of our work by invitation. So cities, governments, art organizations, et cetera, reach out to us. And then we move forward to figure out in some cases, to choose the design site with the city partner. So the state of Victoria, Australia is a good example, where the state of Victoria came to us, Department of Environment, Water and Land Planning, but they didn't have a design site in mind. They just knew they wanted the programming for Melbourne, Australia. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the perfect design sites would be. So that was quite a process. But then an example of Burning Man coming to us, they knew it was for Fly Ranch. So sometimes in partnership, we work hard to figure out the perfect design site, and sometimes it's not important. But at this point, we only work by invitation.
And there's always a lot, even though we knew it was Fly Ranch, it was 4,000 acres. So we worked with them to establish sort of a high level land use plan that focused the team's attentions on particular previously disturbed parts of the site. And when we're looking for a site with someone like the Department of Environment, Water and Land Planning in Victoria, we put together a decision criteria matrix that goes through various site opportunities. And we have something in mind in terms of a site that can capture the imagination of the design community around the world, something to be interesting to design for. For example, in 2014, it was right across from the Little Mermaid in the harbor. So that's like a really, like, wow, I want to design for that site. So that's one of the criteria. And there are many others. Of course, access to renewable energy resources being another key component. And so site visibility is important. That really is about the invited international, or not in the open call international competitions. If we're doing something that's a smaller scale, like the solar mural installations, it's an entirely different site selection criteria. It really is about what's the model for design procurement and what the community wants.
A related question from me. How many of your sites are what you would call city urban sites, and how many are either suburban or rural, or sort of, even a little bit more isolated?
Yeah, Fly Ranch is the most isolated. It's 30 miles from the nearest grid connection. It's completely off grid for no services whatsoever. And that was really interesting because it provided a blank canvas of what would you do if you had a pristine planet Earth and we hadn't messed it up like we have. So how would you approach development to live right in harmony with the planet from square one? That's a unique opportunity. And that ex-urban development is never was the original focus. And so that was an interesting shift for us. Usually we do try to focus on sites that are more urban, brownfield sites, landfill sites, interstitial spaces within the urban context, and reactivate those spaces. Certainly, there's opportunities for places that might not be the ideal place for a mixed-use residential commercial development because they're kind of weird shaped or they're too polluted, or these are the best opportunities for energy landscapes that could live there for 30 years, contributing to the sustainable energy of the city, while also allowing the soil to remediate, for example. And so those are opportunities that we seek out for sure when we talk to new partners.
So here's a follow-up question. Would you consider Chicago as a site?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah. Where particularly? I mean, any sites in mind after the?
Yes, in fact, the Riverwalk along the Chicago River has a place where it turns from going east-west to north-south. It's always in the sun. It's picturesque in terms of architecture because there's lots of tall buildings and some very new, interesting ones there. To me, it would be a perfect site. Plus, I can see it from my window.
It's such a fun question because we just were engaged just at the beginning of the pandemic. We went to NREL in Denver and were a part of a writing workshop with Arizona State University, imagining our solar futures. And we were in breakout groups, and my group was focused on Chicago. Oh. So I wrote this essay short story about a solar future for Chicago. So yes.
Well, if you want to talk a little bit more, I can put you in touch with some people.
Yes, that'd be great.
Let's see, we're getting close to the end here. Rebecca, you had an interesting question about who builds these or who would build them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very, very much for this presentation. I think it was for all of us, it was a positive outbreak from all of this depressing reality of climate change. So thank you so much for this uplifting presentation. All the artwork is beautiful, but again, I'm a little bit concerned about the reality of making that large scale or really installing these for not only for art purposes, but for something more, because of course the capacity factor of these art pieces, as beautiful as they are quite low. I also know that the leadless turbines are quite low in efficiency. So the levelized cost of electricity and the return in investment are both going to be quite low compared to those ugly out of reach power plants. And I was wondering if communities would be willing to pay for that, or would that be investors, or who would pay for these in reality?
It is a great question, and it's a good one to wrap up on. When we started the project, we were really thinking about this through the lens of public art and investment in the beautification of cities. So for a Chicago-focused example, you think of Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate in Millennium Park, and if the question was asked, who's going to pay for that? Obviously, that was one of the most expensive works of art ever designed and built. This is the kind of thing that human culture aspires to achieve, these kinds of landmark explorations of what is possible. And I think we're really working within that realm. We're not going to power the world with artworks, although wouldn't that be nice? Obviously, nearly 100% of our new energy infrastructure will be designed for levelized cost of energy concerns. But there's going to be a small margin on the fractions within very cultural, cherished spaces like the hearts of our cities, where there's an opportunity to become creative, to use these technologies in ways that haven't been conceived of before. And that's where we think there's a real opportunity to engage the creative community around this idea. And so the cost of the kilowatt hours produced from these artworks is not going to be the concern, or that's not the design criteria. It's a kind of awesome bonus that these artworks will generate electricity for the surrounding city. But first and foremost, they're designed to be beautiful contributions to the built environment and economic development drivers. As we were talking about before, art has a real ability. If you ask the businesses around that part of downtown Chicago, they'll tell you how many people come to go to their restaurant or shop in their shop after seeing Cloud Gate and going to the city, partly because they were inspired to see that beautiful work of art. So that's really the realm within which we're working.
And then I'd like to loop back to something that we started our conversation with, and that's that the world that we're working within, where we invite everyone to the table to design our energy futures and our energy landscapes today and tomorrow. It's really a conversation about inclusion and equity at the end of the day, giving agency back to the public. Everyone on this call has an opportunity to imagine what their energy landscape and energy mix is. And how exciting is that it doesn't have to just be in the hands of a few folks around the world making those decisions? And how important is that it not just remain in the hands of a few people around the world? And design competitions are one model to achieve that, but other ways, participatory design on the ground, working with young people, on the ground, working with elders and community groups, and anyone who really wants to sit at that table and be a part of that conversation, not be left behind in the energy transition. And that's who we're speaking to, everyone who wants to be a part of that energy transition, and making sure people know what that means to be a part of the energy transition. So some folks don't even know that there's the possibility that this is a conversation to be a part of. So we, as a nonprofit organization, are mission driven to see to it that voices are at the table, and that creative voices are also at the table, and that we think through this transition in a very fair and equitable way.
Fantastic. I hate to say it, but we are at the end of our time. Plenty more questions that we haven't been able to answer, and plenty more just interesting topics to cover. Maybe there's a way we can follow up. Some of the SISE fellows can follow up. That might be interesting. But thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, and completely unique, I must say, completely unique, but touching many, many areas that go well beyond just the nuts and bolts of renewable energy. So this is really outstanding.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. And everyone was so focused, and we appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Please reach out to us, lagi@landartgenerator.org, if you have any questions we didn't get to today, and we're always happy